Welcome kindreds, it's Jessica. In this video I'm going to share with you my process for bonding with a tarot deck or an oracle deck, but I'm going to use a tarot deck as the example. It works for new decks, but it also works for old decks, and it also works for new and old readers too, so it's a little bit different from some of the random tips you'll find on connecting with your deck, because this is actually like a step-by-step process. So if you follow these steps, and I think it is pretty much guaranteed that you will have a really good relationship with your deck. And it's important to have a really good relationship with your deck, because the better you know your deck, the more intimately you know your deck, then the better and more intimate, more clear your readings will be. I'm going to use my new Sufi Tarot for a demo for this video. If you have a deck that you are specifically wanting to get more acquainted with, then you can go and grab that now and we can do this process together. Or if you like, you can just kind of bookmark the steps and apply it whenever you need to. The first step is to open your deck. You may have already done this. If so, that's fine. You can kind of reset the deck if you have already opened it and just put it back into order. You can give it a little cleanse if you know how to do that, or if that feels necessary. But just what I find, usually just putting it back into order really helps if you're not opening a brand new deck like I am here. Now I know the temptation can be, when you do have a brand new deck, to like rip it open and get in there straight away. But I think it's nice to try and create a nice atmosphere for the very first opening of a deck, especially if it's a deck that you think is going to be important to you in your practice. It just, obviously you meet people in your life in all sorts of situations, and just because you don't have a nice first meeting doesn't mean that you can't go on to have a good relationship, of course, so even if you haven't created that with a deck, it doesn't super matter, but I find it helps to set the stage. So I just like to create a nice environment, a calm environment, at some time when I know I'm not going to be disturbed, and light a candle, maybe some incense. I know not everyone likes to have incense near their cards, so if you don't want to, that's completely fine, but just take some time to get to meet. It's like a meet cute. And I am going to use that kind of relationship terminology because this is a relationship that we're building here. So if you can arrange a meet cute, then so much the better, so that is what I am doing here. It feels a bit weird doing it, actually. It's kind of like an intimate process, so sharing it is a little bit strange, but I think it'll be really useful. I hope it'll be really useful. It's simple but effective. So this is my meet cute, and I just literally start by looking at everything that is here. So I've got a box, and I have a little look at the box, what it's like, how it feels, and then I usually put the box to one side and I look at the book. Oh, let's not put that. Let's put that over there. I have a little look at the book. I don't actually go through it yet, and I just put that to one side, and then I focus my attention on the deck itself. I usually start upside down, but that's just a me thing maybe. And then here we go. And then basically, this is so simple, this first bit, but it's really powerful. I just go through the deck one by one, looking at each card and just kind of feeling my initial reactions to it. I look at the details in the card, like I'm straight away noticing this triangle here. It's like a goddess triangle, and like this is the Fool card, but it's not called the Fool, it's got a different name, so that's something that I'm not familiar with. I'm just noticing things like that. What do I notice? How does this card make me feel? And I like to spend a bit of time doing this. I'm not going to go through it in like real time here with you now, but I just wanted to show it. I have got a video actually where I do this in real time with the Ayeda Tarot, where I literally show every single card and I talk about every single card. So that might be useful to watch that. I'll try and remember to link that at the end of this video. But what we're doing here is just, I say just, it's not just, it is that love at first sight kind of thing. And like, maybe it's not love at first sight, maybe you don't feel a connection to the imagery in the deck, and that's completely fine too. There's lots of different decks out there, and sometimes they speak to us and sometimes they don't. So there'll be certain cards probably that are more important to you than others, like the strength card. Sorry, it's a bit noisy outside. I hope it's not disturbing the video. The Strength card is something that is very important to me because it's my life path card. So I do always like to spend a little bit of time with that. And yeah, I literally go through every single card, just noticing. And I'm doing it faster here now. I'll have to go through this again and do this again in my own time as well, like kind of forming my own impressions. But because I'm talking to you, kind of showing the process here, I don't want to be doing that while I'm talking to you here. Wow. Yeah, interesting. There's already some interesting imagery which I want to go back and have another look at, which is fun. So lots of different names of the cards as well, which is interesting. So I'm guessing, you know, Sufi, obviously, because it's the Sufi Tarot. Okay, and there's also elemental symbols on here which are helpful as well. So that was all the majors. And I tend to like have a little pause after each kind of like block of cards. So after the majors, I'll have a little pause before I start with the minors, and I'll have a pause between the suits in the minors as well. You know, if you feel like making a video, that is a really, really good way of doing it, because, you know, you've got that then, and once you've been using the deck a while, you can look back on that. And it's funny, it's like kind of like watching a video of your first date after you've got to know each other a lot better, and sort of seeing how certain things sat with you then. I know some people like to separate the deck at this point, like they'll go through the deck and separate it into different piles of like cards which kind of are fine, cards which like resonate really strongly with you, like that one is resonating really strongly with me. And then cards that so it's kind of like meh cards, not meh, but like cards that are just okay, and then cards that resonate really strongly, and then cards that you have like a visceral kind of like oh reaction to as well, which, you know, often there are some cards like that in a deck. Although if there's lots of cards like that in a deck, then I try and sort of see why that is. Like perhaps it's because I need to do some kind of work around that, but sometimes it's just because the imagery doesn't resonate with me and I will not keep that deck then. So yeah, just because a card doesn't, you know, you find you don't resonate with a card doesn't mean there's a problem with you necessarily. It might just be that you're not a good fit for that deck, or the deck is not a good fit for you, if you see what I mean. So that was all of the wands. Now we're going to move on to the cups. It's interesting, this deck, because some of the pictures are like kind of quite modern, and like they look like they could have been made very recently, and then some of them look like kind of timeless and ancient. So that's really interesting. I also tend to notice things like colors, patterns, if there's any kind of layered imagery in the cards. I like to make a note of it here now. It is literally like first impressions. What is your first impression of this? So if you're doing this along with me, you know, you're looking through your deck and noticing, you're probably going to want to like pause and take some more time, because, you know, this whole process normally takes me at least half an hour, if not an hour. I sometimes will make some notes, but not usually. Usually it is literally just a kind of like heart connection or not, you know, with the cards as I'm looking through. So okay, so we're on to the swords, which is often a tricky suit. It's quite dark, the swords so far in this deck. Interesting, Four of Swords. Yeah. So I saw this deck in the Hay House sale, and they had some beautiful imagery there with it, you know, of the cards, and it intrigued me. So I decided to get this deck, and like I said, I'll repeat this process more privately as well, so that I can dive in much more deeply to each of the cards. But it you know, you do however long makes sense for you. Okay, and we are on the coins. So coins in the suit, not in this deck, not pentacles. Oh, that's nice. You know, there will be some that you do react to like that. You're like, that's nice. And there might be some, like, even if you don't know tarot at all, there'll be some that you're like, yes. And then there'll be some that you're like, oh, you know. Because that's just how it is with the imagery of the cards. I swear, like I sit down to record a video and it's peaceful and quiet, and then as soon as I press record, everyone seems to be like wandering around and like calling each other. So apologies, that's lovely. Son of Coins. Yeah. Okay. And that is step one. Like I say, take your time with this. Don't rush it. Try and savor it. Try and really like lean into it. It's really much more powerful. Even though it's really simple, it's much more powerful than it seems. Okay, and the second step I like to do then is what I refer to as like the juicy backstory, which is where I like to have a look in the book. But I don't look at the actual meanings of the cards yet. That comes later. Ooh. So what I'm interested in is what is in the book. That's why it's the juicy backstory. It's like the kind of, what is it about the creation of this deck? What was the artist thinking? What was the person who wrote, you know, because quite often it's a different artist to the person who actually wrote the book kind of thing. So finding out the details, it's a bit like, I suppose, kind of like Googling someone if you've just you just met them, looking up on their Facebook, things like that, trying sort of finding out a little bit of background information, which might sound a little bit stalkery, but it also is, it just makes sense because it helps you to understand why certain things are as they are. And I like to see if there's any spreads included as well. I do also have a quick look at the back because quite often there is extra things here. So there are some end notes, which means that there are references in here, so that's interesting in itself. I'm seeing like Rumi popping up a lot, you know, unsurprisingly as it's a Sufi Tarot. And then acknowledgements, I like to read those. I find it gives me, again, some juicy backstory about the author, about the artist. Well, this is an art team. So that's interesting as well, isn't it? Like, it's a different feel, a deck created by a team than a deck created by one solo artist. I also find that it's a different feel when you get decks that are created and illustrated by the same person, whereas when you've got a different artist and illustrator working together as a team, it's got a slightly different feel to it as well. So yeah, that is the juicy backstory. And you'll probably notice that I haven't like really, like, this all still looks pretty pristine at the moment. Again, I'll be going back in and having a proper read because I didn't obviously read that now while I was chatting away here as well. So I'll have to do that. And then I feel like this is kind of like third date now. Step one's like first date. Step two is like a little bit of background info before you go on your second date, and then third date. So it's time to get a little bit physical. And this is where I will begin to like actually shuffle the cards. I feel kind of reluctant to do this because I haven't done the step one and step two properly in my process, but I am going to do it. I'm going to kind of force myself to do it, even though normally this comes for me later on. It's too soon before I've had a chance to. I'll just put them back into order again. She says, sort of like soothing herself. So I tend to do a little bit of overhand shuffling just to mix them up, and then ooh, I'm a terrible shuffler. You would think like after sort of 20 years of working with cards I would be better. But I'm still terrible. They're quite stiff, these cards, and they're also quite big, and my hands are small. I've got little dutty hands. I'm only a little dutty person, to be honest, so it's not surprising my hands are small. So I'm going to try and just riffle. Oh, I don't think I'm going to get any. Oh, maybe. So sometimes they're a bit stiff when you first start anyway, and then it gets easier and easier the more you do it. So yeah, there we go. So I just spend some time, and like I might not do all of these steps in one session. I might literally do the first session because that takes quite a long time, and then come back to it again. But sometimes if I've got like a little while that I can do that, I will kind of keep the ball rolling kind of thing. And yeah, I like to just really shuffle for quite a long time. The shuffling is part of the connection, like the physical connection. We tend to like prioritize the mental, the kind of learning of the imagery of the cards, getting to know the imagery of the cards like visually, but like getting to know the physicality of the deck as well is really important. And also, if the deck doesn't feel good, which is obviously what you find out at this stage here now, I actually think this one's going to be okay, even though it's quite stiff. It's starting to like bend a little bit, and I think it will be, it's big for a tarot though. Like, I don't see why tarots have to be this big. it's like oracle sized. But yeah, you kind of physically get to know the card. You'll find also when you're shuffling that you'll get the smell of the deck as well. Like if it's a brand new deck, it usually just kind of smells like new books, new deck. Sometimes if it's like an older deck, you might get little wafts of incense, or sometimes if it's a bit musty, you'll get that kind of musty smell. And it's interesting to kind of really take note of like the sensuality of it, all of those kind of levels of feeling, all the different, use all your senses. Well, maybe not taste. You could if you wanted to, but like it's not just a visual. Tarot is not a visual only experience. It is more than that. Like the sound of the cards as they slide together, it's all of the senses. It's sensory. It's a sensory experience. And that brings us on to the next step, which is to do the first reading. Now I'm going to cut the deck. That's what I like to do before I pull cards. And I don't do like a specific deck interview spread. You might like to do that. That's completely fine. You know, I'm not saying this process is better than anybody else's process. If you've got a process that works for you, then stay there. You know, use that. But then, like, if you have, you probably won't be watching this video necessarily. Or, you know, if you have, then share it in the comments so that other people can see your process too and interact with that. But I just like to take 3 cards with the kind of general idea of like, how am I going to be working with this deck? And I've already got a major popping out here. We got the Lovers. We got the Hierophant. So I obviously didn't do a super good job of shuffling. And we've got my birth card, Strength. So, you know, 3 majors coming out. You saw me shuffle. I didn't do a great job of shuffling because, you know, I was chatting while I was doing it. But 3 majors here for this deck. And look, with the Hierophant right there in the center, and this kind of like rib cage of the divine, where the heart is placed inside, you know, that kind of inspiration, exploration, connection. It seems like this deck is going to be really, it's going to be a teacher for me. It's going to be a way that I can teach, that I can learn, and I can lean into like really like heartfelt inspiration. It's going to be a source of inspiration for me as well, you know. And I love that this Hierophant is outside, not inside, you know, like a lot of Hierophants tend to be inside the temple, inside the kind of dogma, whereas this Hierophant is outside in the open air with the trees, you know, very kind of Buddha-esque. So yeah, I find that really interesting. And we've got the Lovers here. No, like, what is this? Is that like, it looks like a cushion, or maybe like even like somebody else's foot or something coming into it there. And we got these wings. It's almost like an angelic vision in this card as well. And then my life path card here, the Strength card. So I feel like this deck is going to be teaching me and helping me to learn more about how I reconcile myself with my relationships with others. And it's really interesting for me because I'm actually filming this video around the Aries new moon, which is on that like Libra Aries axis, which is self and other. And so it seems really like on point that I've opened this deck and filmed this video around this moon. So yeah, really interesting. And like I would most definitely be like noting down now in my tarot journal, in my journal what came out for me. I'd probably take a photograph and print it out of the cards that came out, and sort of like my first impressions of what this deck has got to teach me, how we're going to work together. It looks like it's going to be in kind of a major way. There are majors coming out. There's lots of air cards, space here, you know, lots of breathing. We've got Gemini, we've got Taurus, we've got Leo. So, you know, these things, I would be making a note of all of these things which are coming out for me. You know, that might seem a lot. I'm pulling on lots of threads there of things I already know, you know, like the astrological kind of correspondences of the cards and the meanings of the cards and stuff like that. If you aren't in that space yet, then don't worry about that. Just literally make a note of the cards that came out. And if you want to, you could just look in the guidebook then as well for what those cards mean, or just make some notes about the imagery and what you feel when you are looking at those cards. How does it make you feel inside as well? Like, where in your body are you feeling it? How do you feel? So yes, that is that step, that speak to me, that kind of first conversation. It might even be sometimes like your first kind of, where you see a different side of it as well. Like sometimes when you're looking through and you're just kind of looking at the gorgeous imagery of the deck, then you can kind of get a little bit lost in the eyes of it, you know, you're kind of just gazing into each other's eyes. Whereas when you start speaking to another person, you have to, well, as I'm personifying the deck unashamedly here, but you have to realize that there's give and take in a relationship then, because it's, when you're just looking, it's easy to kind of make up what that other person, what that other thing is in your imagination. Whereas when you're actually in dialogue, that's when it gets a lot more like the reality, you know, kind of the shit hits the fan, the reality happens, and you have to like view it as a conversation and not as a one-way street, you know. So, and that's what we want, isn't it? Like, there'd be no point in using any kind of divination tools, there'd be no point in using tarot if we weren't getting information and something that we don't already have, you know, a dialogue. If we weren't getting a dialogue, there would be no point, because we would just be stuck. But we need to grow, we need to learn, and so that is why we can use these tools for our personal development. So yeah, I think it's really exciting and really wonderful. And the fifth step, oh, putting it upside down, is like, again, probably quite obvious, but it is to spend time, quality time together. By which I mean, when I get a new deck, I tend to use it all the time. I use it for all the readings, you know, I'll use it for daily draws, I will use it for moon spreads, I will use it for just like everything. Just take cards from it and just look at them, you know, there's lots of opportunities to use decks. If you've got a book that you're working through or a course that you're taking, use the new deck, you know. It can sometimes seem a bit daunting, because especially if you've got another deck which is kind of like tried and trusted, you might kind of feel like, oh, I know that one better, I'll go back to that. Like, the only thing that I don't use it for at this stage is reading for other people. So I use it myself, for as many different things and readings as possible before I use it for other people, because I don't start using decks to read for other people, and even like family and stuff like that, but certainly not for professional readings until I feel like I really know that deck. Because even though it can be fun and kind of a really good steep learning curve to use a deck with somebody else, and like do that sometimes, like do it with somebody that knows you and that you know really well and knows that you don't know the deck. I don't think it's kind of professional to do it with people who are paying you for a reading. But you know, you you do you, so you decide if that is the right thing for you. But personally, I don't do that. But yeah, it can be good. It can be a really good steep learning curve to read for somebody else with a deck when you feel not ready. And some people never feel ready. Like, some people like use a deck for 10 years and they still use it for themselves and they don't feel ready to read for somebody else. And in that case, you know that deck. If you've been using it that much, you know, you can know a deck within a month if you're using it a lot, you know. I don't even want to put a time frame on it, because it's going to be so different for different people, but you will know when you feel like you know it. Them, I'm going to say. I also try and make sure that I keep notes of most of, like, not all of, but most of the readings that I do with a new deck, because the cards are coming up for me. And you might be wondering, does she ever look at the rest of the guidebook? I do. That is when I do that. So like, say I did a reading and cards came out, I will always use my own impressions first. I'll make in my journal what I think that is saying to me, and then I will start to use the guidebook, and I will look up just each individual card that has come out. I won't read through it all back to back. I'll like look it up Okay, that's interesting. Make a note of that kind of thing, you know. And then say at the end of like usually about a month, I will have a look through and I'll know like, oh, these cards have been coming out rather a lot. And sometimes I'll make a pile of them. And like these cards, I don't think I've come across at all. And then I will then go through the guidebook and read each entry. Because sometimes, like this guidebook doesn't look like it's got huge amounts of stuff in it, but some of them have got like a whole story arc and there's characters and there's things like that, that if you don't read the guidebook, you miss out on all of that stuff. And so I do think it's really important to read the guidebook, but I feel like that is, like I say, backstory. So it's something that you want as well as your own relationship. So it's like kind of getting notes from past relationships, maybe. Perhaps this is where the kind of metaphor breaks down, but you need to know your deck, yourself, your impressions, how it makes you feel, and then you can layer in the things from the guidebook, the meanings from the guidebook as well. You know, it's something that works together with your own connection with the deck. It's also just really interesting to note as well, like which cards haven't come out, because that is very telling in itself as well. It's like, okay, these cards haven't come out for me in this month that I've been using this deck a lot. Why is that, you know? And so it's a whole kind of like anti-divination, or like a an opposite divination, to kind of see, okay, these are the things that I'm not working with right now, you know? So yeah, it's really interesting. And then step 6 is keeping the magic alive. And how do you keep the magic alive in a relationship? Well, you need to keep in touch. So once you've had that period of like really working with the deck a lot, daily, most likely, you know, I prefer to do it daily. When I first had a new deck, I'll use it for all the things, like I said. But then you can't, like, I've got too many decks. I don't know how many decks you've got. Perhaps you can continue to use that same deck daily. If you've only got a few decks, then you probably could do that. But if you've got lots of decks, or if you plan on having lots of decks, you're not going to be able to use every single deck daily. So what I try and do then is, the way I store my decks means that I have them all visible to me at all times, or there are some that are not on my shelves visible, but they're in certain locations in my home because I use them for certain things. So I'm keeping in like a visual contact. It's almost like kind of like we can still see each other. We're still seeing each other. We're just not kind of like hanging out so regularly. But I also try and make sure that I like rotate through my decks. So I'm using different decks according to different seasons, different kinds of readings, things like that. I try and have like a purpose for each of the decks in my practice. Otherwise it kind of feels like maybe that deck doesn't have a place in my practice, you know, in my development. So we work that out. And some decks seem completely happy with being used once in a blue moon, whereas other decks like to be used a lot more often. So you'll just have to feel that out, but you do need to keep in touch. And if you find that you've kind of lost touch a little bit, then that's fine. You can just put the deck back in order and then restart the process again, you know, and just go through, oh yes. And like this time it's like kind of seeing an old friend. It's like, oh, I remember this, you know, because you've done the other steps with the deck. And so you get reacquainted a lot more quickly than you do if getting acquainted in the first place. Sometimes people ask like, well, how do I know if I still know the deck well enough? And I think there's some things that you can notice, like for example in this deck it'll be really clear because I won't remember I've got the numbers on, so it gives me a little head start, but like I won't be remembering perhaps what the names are on the different cards. I perhaps won't be remembering, some decks have got like the suits named in different ways, so perhaps you won't remember that, and you've kind of, oh yeah, you've forgotten. That's an important detail, isn't it? That's something important that you need to remember about that deck. Also, like with the court cards, often are in slightly different names or patterns. If you don't remember what they are, then you know you've obviously kind of become less than ideally acquainted with the deck. And again, going back to what I said at the beginning, is that we want to be intimately acquainted with our decks, because when we are, then we get much deeper readings. If you're only superficially acquainted, then you only get superficial readings. That is just how it is. So if you want deep readings which can help you with your spiritual growth, help you change your life, then, you know, help you to grow and develop as a person, which, you know, these are reasons why I like to use tarot, then you need to know the cards and like know them really sensuously, really viscerally, really personally. So you know them, and most likely you'll find that you know what it says in the book before you even look it up with the decks that you know really well. You know, you're like, oh yeah, that's that character, or I know this. And perhaps if you don't even remember all the details, you'll have a kind of feeling about it, a memory about it, that you know, oh, there was something in the guidebook about this card that I need to remember, and so you'll look it up. So, you know, it's exactly the same as with people. You know, we don't know them completely because we are all individuals, but we can know them on a much better level, or we can know them on a kind of superficial acquaintance kind of level. And that is like, an acquaintance is not really what I want when I'm using tarot. So, you know, you can decide what is right for you. I hope you found this video useful. I do share lots of other tarot and oracle and just kind of creative living in harmony with everything, everyday magic stuff on my channel. So if that sounds good, then check out some of my other videos. Let me know if you have other ideas for connecting with the deck as well. And if you do try my process, come back and let me know how that works for you. Thank you so much for watching. Warmest blessings, and I will see you very soon.